Sony Computer Entertainment Division was not founded yet. Sony's field of businesses were audio and video equipment, televisions, and record business. In '88, Sony began to develop a CD player for the Super Nintendo. Several prototypes were manufactured. Sony wanted to have control over the license of these discs. Nintendo didn't like this approach and they turned to Philips, which is a company from the Netherlands. This type of business that Nintendo was having outside the country did not give them a good image with other Japanese companies. Even more, it was not exceptional. Their renowned license as Super Mario Bros. And Legend of Zelda had been granted to Philips, and the result was quite poor. It was in 1991 that Ken Kutaragi, who at the time was a research and development engineer for Sony, presented the first prototype of the console at CES in Chicago. The next day, Nintendo introduced that Super Disc was developed by Philips and not Sony. An aspect that is less explained when discussing the history of PlayStation is the fact that the folks at Sony approached Sega. People from Sega and Sony have come up with a partnership agreement to fund a small development. When this idea hit the big bosses, the word of the management was that Sony knew nothing about hardware and software. They had no reason to do a partnership. Some years after, Sony launched the PS1 in December 1994 in Japan and in 1995 for the rest of the world. Just with the intro song from Rage Against the Machine, Guerrilla Radio, we already know what's going on. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 received ratings of 9.3 from IGN, 9 from GameSpot, 90 from PSX Nation, and 17 out of 20 from JV.com. According to IGN, it was a mixture of arcade and simulation skateboarding. The game was great since it wasn't a racing or competition-only game. It relied on actual challenges that unlocked other levels. The Hangar, Skull 2, Marseille, a competition level, New York City, Venice Beach, Skate Street, the second competition in this game. Philadelphia, an open world type level. And finally, Bull Ring, the final competition. As for the MetaGamer, the gameplay and the graphics deserved a 8 out of 10. The game length and difficulties gave us a lot of challenges back then, and still to this day, I still have a lot to do. Mostly to get to the chopper drop and skate heaven levels. The soundtrack was great and deserved an 8 out of 10. No story was considered for this critic. Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2 on PS1 get an 8.2 out of 10 from the MetaGamer. You can play it now with updated graphics on the current gen console. Another popular hero, Mario. Our hero has to go through 32 levels to complete the game. This game was a 2D platformer, but a strong 3D effect. The difficulty obviously increased gradually. Crash Bandicoot had a pretty cool style that went well with Sony's goal of making it look young and hip. This is the 1990, by the way. In Naughty Dog's world, Crash was not your typical 2D platform game character, which brought him into quite specific situations. About Crash, critic. It's a game with some really intuitive control that gets you hooked really quick. A 9 for the gameplay. Some great graphics for that time, don't forget the hip style for those years. 8.5 out of 10. Length and difficulties, a game that tested us from the first moment and gradually progressed to another stage of insanity in some instance. Crash Bandicoot on PS1 tests your limits and become something so hard that you want to throw your PS1 through the window. A 9 out of 10. A Caribbean atmosphere, but always with a touch of danger. The music was really varied with each level or situation. So an 8 out of 10. Story-wise, nothing exceptional with this one. The story was a lot similar to games such as Donkey Kong, even Super Mario Bros. In some instance. It's not an important aspect of this type of game. Which gives us a score of 8.4 out of 10 for Crash Bandicoot according to the MetaGamer. In Final Fantasy VIII, we play the role of Squall, who is a member of Sept. This is a special mercenary unit from the Garden's military school. This unit was created for the purpose of fighting against other evil forces or witches. "17 years before our history, a witch ruled the metropolis of Estar, MP that we love so much. Now the summons are now called GF, that are guardian forces, and they play a role in your ability. It's a fact that I don't really want to pick. IGN gave FF8 a 9, and GameSpot gave them a 9.5 out of 10. JV.com gave them an 18 out of 20. Concerning the MetaGamer score, the gameplay deserved a 7.5 since it was a lot different than the previous entries. The graphics and cutscenes were fantastic back then, a 9 out of 10. The length and difficulties, I have nothing bad to say about it, so a 9.5 out of 10. An amazing soundtrack that deserves a 9. A kind of confusing story back then and still is now, so a 7 out of 10. That brings us to a 84% for Final Fantasy VIII. Good job, you passed the FF Academy. We play as Harry Mason while he is looking for his missing daughter in the sinister town of Silent Hill. Falling upon a cult leading a ritual to revive a deity it adores, Harry discovers his true origin. We find ourselves in a city that is between two worlds, and a nightmare turned reality. IGN and GameSpot rated it 9 and 8.2 out of 10 respectively. The fact that the character was an ordinary man increased the immersion according to IGN, especially being limited with bullets and Harry's inexperience. You feel even more about himself, while having the dismal atmosphere given off by the look of the city with the fog and its semi-desert population. GameSpot wrote that Silent Hill established a very unsettling atmosphere that it intrigued as much as it haunted you. JV.com praised the storyline and ambiance. They noted that puzzles were too short and monsters were too easy to kill. They ended up giving it a 14 out of 20 in this area. This did not prevent Silent Hill to get a 19 out of 20 from jeuxvideo.com on PlayStation 1. For the gameplay, it's a 7.5 out of 10 for Silent Hill. It was kind of a clunky gameplay, a little bit like Resident Evil. Not as fun in my opinion. The graphics looked alright for that time. The fog helped a lot with some of the textures, so the game ended up being fine. The CGs were great back then, a 9 out of 10 for this aspect. The story was a 9 out of 10, a great storytelling worthy of the best horror movies. That sums us to a 8.4 out of 10 for Silent Hill 1. At the end of Resident Evil 1, we have Jill and Chris who manage to destroy the Tyrant and escape the mansion, destroying it too. Which brings us to the beginning of Resident Evil 3, which happened to overlap Resident Evil 2. We start as Jill while she prepares to escape Raccoon City. Of course, there is nothing easy and Jill has to find refuge in a warehouse. A man who lost his daughter is there and Jill continues to flee. On her way, she meets Brad, who was the pilot in RE1, but his presence was brief back then. And still is now, since we meet the Nemesis, a new BOW that only aims to destroy all stars. We meet the member of UBCS, Umbrella Bioweapon Countermeasure Service, with Carlos and 2 other members who seems secondary at first glance. We're off on a quest to the top of the clock tower, but our friend Nemesis is waiting for us with, guess what, a bazooka. Nemesis show up again. Carlos blow up the hospital. Nemesis show up again. And, like you probably expected, we meet a giant worm. A conspiracy plot like every action movie get unveiled, and bunch of other great action sequences. Back when the game released, IGN gave it a 9.4 and GameSpot an 8.8 out of 10. IGN noted the graphics as one of the strongest points, like the characters were nicer, the environment, and the city. The CGI's video were great and the soundtrack was explosive. A great job to bring the immersive aspect was done by the development team. JV.com gave it a 17 out of 20, saying that the length was close from the other 2 RE games, but it was a little bit too short. They also wrote that the story was a lot of retelling and rehashing. A lot of reviews